Well, let's just get started on the right foot today. Everybody shout, Hosanna. Hosanna. Get the palm branches up. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in the... Hosanna to the Son of David. Hosanna to the Son. Hosanna. Hosanna. This is a great day in the kingdom, a great day in the church year. It's such an exciting day for us as a congregation and as the people of God as we celebrate this moment of joy, this crux of the whole story, of this story that we've been going through for now 24 or 5 weeks. Now we come to the high point, the ultimate moment as Jesus rides in glory into Jerusalem. And everybody's excited, and Zechariah, the prophet, had written about it as we read just a few moments earlier. Let's put it up on the screen here, where Zechariah says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you righteous and having salvation, gentle, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And this whole story, the story of Christ's coming is a reflection of where we have arrived at. You've probably seen the book. Most of you, I hope, have the book. And on the front of the book, there are two things. There is a crown on the front of there, a king's crown, which represents that whole lower story perspective of the Israelites wanting a king. They wanted the power. They wanted the glory, expand the borders, bring us a king like David. And then there is, in its shadow, I don't know if you've noticed this, in its shadow, there is the picture of another crown, of another sort, the crown of thorns. And today, we recognize on this Palm Sunday that there is a bittersweet journey that Jesus makes into Jerusalem. It's not just a rah-rah event, but there is much more going on. And that, Palm Sunday, Holy Week, presents us with a choice today. So let's jump in, and you can keep your notes in the back of the bulletin if you would like to. And we're going to start right away on the first point to talk about the first choice that Holy Week presents us with, which is an earthly throne. So we've brought a chair in here today that represents a king's throne. There's this royal sash, and we've got a king's crown up here. This represents really the whole lower story perspective. That when Christ comes riding in on the donkey, if you look at it from the lower story perspective, Christ has finally arrived. God is finally experiencing the glory that he's due from his people. The crowds are there. Jesus has wowed the crowds with his teaching. He's been healing. He's been performing miracles. And from the lower story perspective, this is it. We've made it. And this lower story and upper story is something we've been talking about as we've gone through the story. The lower story perspective is how we view it, how our human perspective sees things. The upper story perspective is what God is seeing in the midst of this and what God is doing. And from the lower story perspective, it looks like Christ has arrived. In that day, on Roman coins, remember the day back when we used to use coins and we would put, the heads of people like some of our past presidents on them? We don't use coins anymore. Although yesterday I used some coins, and the clerk looked at me when I handed her about a fistful of coins and put them on the counter to pay for some cold medicine that I'm still working on. And she's looking at all this and going, okay, what are we doing with this? She didn't even know what coins were, I think, anymore. But back in the day, in the Roman day, when they used to use coins, they would put the picture of a Roman emperor on it and palm branches to signify the power and significance of that leader, of that ruler. And so when Jesus comes riding into Jerusalem and they start to cut down palm branches, the message is, this is our new king. This is the power that we've been looking for. And there's that word, Hosanna, that is spoken by the people. Let me first, before I get to that, talk about the one other earthly power. When the Roman governor over the area, his name is Pontius Pilate. He's governor over a significant area of Judea and sort of Samaria, and it includes Jerusalem. And Jesus stands before him, and here's what Pilate says. He says this, "You don't want to talk to me?" He says, "Don't you realize that I have the power to release you or to crucify you?" And isn't this the time that Jesus really should exercise now his power? His moment has come, and he's arrested, and now should be the time, right? He's ready to show this power. Well, the disciples had been arguing about this power. James and John's mother had come to Jesus, and she said, "Hey, when you come to your power, let my son sit at your right and at your left." And Jesus says, "Well, that's not my power to give. And do you really know what you're asking?" And she seems to think so, and the boys are all excited about that, and the other disciples are arguing because when Jesus comes in power, they want to be the vice president. They want to rule. They would love this chair. They'd love to be standing around this chair. And when the palm branches come down on Palm Sunday, there's the message, "He's the new king." And everybody's saying Hosanna, they're waving. And the word Hosanna is a word that in our English language is best translated to save. Save us. Save us from the powers that be. Save us from the Roman authority. Save us from the chief priests and the religious authorities and their oppressive nature. Save us from all the ruling authorities. Hosanna, they were shouting. And Jesus had the power to rule like that. Make no mistake, he could have been a David-like ruler. They were saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna to the Son of David." They were expecting that he would expand the borders like David did. They wanted the rings and the bling that comes with, wearing the crown, the gold. They were all excited about what comes with the earthly power. They wanted to rise to power with Jesus. This chair represents the authority, the power, the strength in our world today. It really represents that lower story perspective that we have. Are we making it? Who are we in life today? What is Christianity in our world? Where is its power today? Well, with all due respect to David, the king who slew the giant Goliath, who subdued the Philistines, who took on all the enemies of Israel, who expanded the borders to like never before. With all due respect to David, Jesus has bigger fish to fry. That's the lower story perspective of Palm Sunday. Be careful of this chair. Lots of crowds are gathering here. They're excited about what's taking place on Palm Sunday. Beware of that lower story perspective in your own life. Jesus presents us with an upper story picture of what's about to happen, which brings us to point 2 in today's message. Jesus presents us the way of the cross. Pilate says to him, "Now don't you know I have power over you?" And Jesus says this, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." Pilate, if my kingdom were of this place, it would be game over for you. Instead, Jesus is doing something much bigger. You see, Christianity isn't just a means to an end. Christianity is the end. It's not a means to some glory on our behalf over here. It's really a walk to Calvary. Instead of the royal rings and the bling, he took instead the nails and the cross and the crown of thorns. And he says, if you want to be my followers, if you want to be my disciples, I'm headed here, not here. So the significance of Palm Sunday and the palms really ties together the Old Testament prophecies and everything that was said about the Messiah coming and brings it to a place of where Jesus is at the center of this and connects David now. And here all the crowds, they see Jesus, and they only want to make him king and throw off the Romans and wear the royal robes. And we caught last week Peter getting into that and missing that, right? Jesus said to Peter, to the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter says, "You're the Messiah." And Jesus says, "You're right." And Peter says, "Well, let's get going to Jerusalem and let's take over." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan, because I'm not headed there. I'm headed here to the cross." If you want to, Jesus says, follow me, you need to deny yourself. And if we want to follow Jesus, we need to follow him to the cross. And we get here and we say, "Wow, Jesus, this looks great. Oh gosh, we get the nails and we get the thorns and we get the cross and we get the sacrifice. Wow, isn't it wonderful?" And isn't it any wonder that by the time Good Friday came, there's just a handful of people surrounding the cross. The crowds were over here. They were wanting the glory and the power and the strength and everything that came with it. They bailed because they wanted an earthly king, but Jesus says, "I want to be a greater king than all of that." He was taking on sin and death and mortality and guilt and shame. And he says, "I'll win a victory over that for you here." I know you like to think, Jesus says, that life is over here, but here is the reality. The cross is the reality. You need me here and you need to follow me here, Jesus says. And you need to surrender to him so that he can give you peace and love and joy and hope that you cannot get over here. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Life of Pi. It's an interesting story, Academy Award-winning. It's a critically acclaimed story that has some spiritual overtones about a 12-year-old boy whose name actually comes from that math equation of pi, 3.14, and then there's a lot of numbers following it. And he wrote out the infinite numbers on the board one day in his class, and people started calling him Pi. And the story goes that he is raised in he's from India, and he's raised in a Hindu home. And he's kind of known a lot about God until really finally he doesn't know God personally until he meets Jesus Christ. And in meeting Jesus Christ, he's sort of like the Pharisees. On that Palm Sunday, he knew a lot about religion, but he didn't know the compassion of God. And when he discovers that, God's love is what changes him. Let's take a look at this clip from Life of Pi.
You must be thirsty. Here, I brought you this.
Why would a God do that? Why would he send his own son to suffer for the sins of ordinary people?
Because he loves us. God made himself approachable to us, human, so we could understand him. We can't understand God in all his perfection, but we can understand God's Son and his suffering as we would a brother's.
That made no sense. Sacrificing the innocent to atone for the sins of the guilty. What kind of love is that? But this son, I couldn't get him out of my head.
If God is so perfect and we are not, why would He want to create all this? Why does He need us at all?
All you have to know is that He loves us. God so loved this world that He gave His only Son.
The longer I listened to the priest, the more I came to like this Son of God.
Thank you, Vishnu, for introducing me to Christ.
Hey, Mike, to be back on? That sounds good. All right. Well, I've studied Hinduism, and I've studied a lot of other world religions, pretty extensively, actually. And I found that in all of them, people are on an ascent to God. It's about becoming something, about climbing. But the great news about Christianity is it's God comes to us in Christ. And He comes down to us. It's all about direction, really. The religions of the world are ultimately what I found about me achieving some moral good or values. That's not all bad, but it's ultimately about me achieving some spiritual pinnacle, climbing some mountain that I'm just not able to climb. Maybe you're better than me, and maybe those religions would be for you then if you think that you can become perfect. But for me, I recognize that Jesus came in the form of God, humbled Himself, came to us, and descended into the Kidron Valley from the Mount of Olives, and from there walked to the way of the cross. Where at the cross, He would say, I have redeemed you for things that you cannot keep yourself. And He says that I don't want you to use it as a means to achieve some worldly good. But He said, instead of taking over the world, He says, I'm going to take over death, and I'm going to take over guilt and shame, and He's won a victory for you here. Well, when Pi in that movie started to realize that, everything changes for him. And the movie, unfortunately, goes way over in some boundaries of trying to connect all religions together. But I want to say to you, is the point is that at one moment his father is telling him, look at reason, start with reason. And Pi finally says to him, I want to be baptized. And it's in knowing the love of Christ that he experiences that power. You may say, well, that's great, that's fine, that's Hollywood, that's Bollywood, whatever. That just doesn't happen in our world today. Well, this week, Pastor Steve and I had a chance to meet a Christian from India. She's a Lutheran pastor. She's just recently become a pastor in the LCMC. She's from India, and she was born and raised a Hindu. She, in 2007, gave her life to Christ, began to study, and has gone to seminary, and a couple of years ago, she's ordained. And her story is that at a time of great difficulty, she began to truly search for God. And what she found in Christ was this compassionate God, the same compassionate God that Pi had found. And she decided she wanted to walk the way of the cross. And so Pastor Steve is there, and he says, gosh, I would love for our people to hear your story. And she says, well, I've written, a study on how to reach Hindu people. And Pastor Steve says, we have all these people from India here in our neighborhood. It would be great if you could come. And she says, yeah, I'd love to do that. And the hair is standing up on the back of our necks as we're listening to this. And we realize that in the upper story perspective, what looks to us like death, what looks to us like defeat, what looks to us like nothing is God's power and God's glory. And so the upper story perspective is that God has won a victory. The lower story perspective is that, wait a minute, he had it on Palm Sunday. Why did he give it up? And there's one more piece to this, is there's a lower story perspective, an upper story perspective, and then there's our story. Where does it all intersect for you? And that's the final choice today, is that we need to surrender to his lordship. Holy Week is really a story about love. It's about God's love for you and for our universe, how Christ brought in the kingdom through love on the way to the cross, not an earthly throne with all the crowns and the robes and the authority and the power and the dress and the bling and the rings, but it's about surrender all of those because Christ comes here and he loves you. My question is, where are you in that crowd on Palm Sunday? I pray that this would be a holy week for you, whether you're a seeker and just listening and wondering about these things, whether you're beginning to believe and follow Jesus, or whether you're all in. This week I ask that you would open your heart to Jesus. Let Jesus in, because we need to decide whether we want to lead Jesus here in our understanding of Christianity and receive all the fruits and benefits and love and power and glory that comes with being a Christian, or whether we really want to walk to the way of the cross, because Jesus beats and defeats enemies that I cannot on my own. 4 years later, as Pi is now in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, he's been shipwrecked, and he alone has survived. Well, he's not quite alone. He's on a lifeboat, and there's a ferocious tiger on there with him. So he's sort of on a raft outside of this, and at one point this incredible storm comes up, and he makes a confession of God in the midst of the storm. Take a look.
Praise be to God, Lord of all worlds, the compassionate, the merciful. Come out! Richard Bucker! Come on, you have to see this! It's beautiful! Don't hide yourself! He's come to us! It's a miracle! Come out and see God, Richard Bucker! Why are you scaring him? Oh, God! I've lost my family! I've lost everything! I surrender! What more do you want?
Push it again. He finally has to surrender it all. He says, God, what more do you want? I'm surrendering it all to you. I think some of us are like him in the midst of the storm. In the storm, finally, when there's a moment of light, we see and we say, God, you are almighty. You're the compassionate. You're the one I've been looking for. And Jesus says, I want you to surrender all of this so that you can see this. What would it be like for you if you lived surrendered to Christ for 1 week? Now that would be a holy week. What if we lived for Christ and made what's primary for just this week, and left all that's secondary to be secondary for just this week? So often we come here and we pretend that we've got it all together. We pretend that we are great and that we're good and that we can achieve. But it's really in standing here together that we recognize in the midst of the storm that we cannot by our own power come to Christ, that it's Him who comes to us. The centurion who represents the power of the world at the cross, who's crucifying Christ, finally says this: truly, He was the Son of God. Jesus said it's finished. He didn't say it's finished, I'm dead, it's lost, it's over, I'm done. He said it's finished. It's completed. I've won the victory over sin and death and power. But only a few people hear it that day. Only a handful of people are standing there. The rest of the crowds are still over here wondering, what happened? Isn't Jesus supposed to deliver all of this to us? Where are you on Palm Sunday? What's your confession? My prayer is that you'll follow Christ, that you'll wave the branches with the kids who are about to come in here in a moment, and that you'll not just observe the Palm Sunday parade, but you'll become a part of it, and you'll not just follow Jesus the Mount of Olives, but you'll follow Him all the way to the cross.